Hello everyone, welcome to The Insider on Latera TV. I'm Caroline Hill, editor of Legal IT Insider, and I'm here today with Travis Smith's head of legal technology, Shawn Curran. Hi Shawn.
Hi Caroline, how are you?
Yeah, I'm very well, thank you. Thank you so much for joining me.
No worries, it's a pleasure.
So we have got a lot to talk about. You've recently, just last week, launched an open source contract labelling tool called Etatona. But there's been a lot since you joined Travers in March last year. There's been an awful lot. You've done a lot of stuff. So I'm gonna introduce you properly first, and then we're going to talk about a few of the sort of highlights of the last sort of couple of years, I guess now, almost a year and a half, whatever it is. And then before we come on to talk about Etatona, what it is, what it does, and you can talk us through that. So first of all, so as I said, so you joined, it was March, wasn't it, last year you joined Travers?
Yeah, but just over a year and a half ago in March 2019, I think.
And before that you were at Freshfields. And I was looking up your title, am I wrong? You were innovation consultant, that's your title, wasn't it?
Yeah, I started at Freshfields as a domain architect of legal technology, and relocated down to London and moved into the innovation team.
Okay, and so you came shortly. So Oliver Bethel joined Travers a bit before you, didn't he? So he was at Freshfields, and then you were sort of shortly behind him. He's CTO at Travers, is that right?
Yeah, so Ollie was the interim CTO at Freshfields when Richard Harris moved on, and then he got the role at Travis Smith as CTO there, and then I joined him at Travis Smith.
Yeah, cool. And then so tell me about, so you're head of legal technology. So tell me tell us about what your role is. What were you brought in to do, and what are you doing?
Sure. So the way that the legal tech team is split up, we've got sort of products and engineering. So legal technology products, things like DocuSign, file sharing platforms, a document management system, that sort of sits in the product side. We have an engineering capability, so a group of software engineers, legal engineers, product engineers who look to build solutions internally where we think that there's opportunity for competitive advantage, as we have sort of open sourced a couple of those products. And then the other side of legal technology is the e-discovery and e-data services. So that is everything like document review, not so much on the contract review side, but more on the document review side, and then the dispute practice and some of the other practices. So that's the way the sort of team is structured.
Yeah, okay. Do you think it's becoming more common for people to have legal engineers? Do you think, Travis, how many legal engineers have you got?
We've actually only got one legal engineer, and it's a girl called Eleanor Hobson, and she's an associate in our commercial team, 4 days a week, and she works with us 1 day a week on a Monday as a legal engineer. So it's actually really useful for her to be practicing as a lawyer and building client relationships and drafting contracts every day and working really closely with clients, and then coming into our team and sort of translating that to the software engineers. I've seen different approaches to taking lawyers on secondment into technology teams, innovation teams, and having them actively practice and then also working in the team, I think is probably the best way of doing it, certainly from my experience.
Yeah, finally, I was having exactly the same conversation yesterday. It's difficult without, they really bring the benefit of that deep understanding of what's important and what the problem is and what they're trying to solve, don't they? Which I think sometimes if you just come at it from a tech perspective, you approach it with a tech first solution, which actually you need to go, right, what's the problem? And it's the lawyers that are really good at spotting that, I guess.
Yeah, and if you're doing sort of agile iteration and development, then if you've got a lawyer who's working day in, day out, and then coming back and sort of updating us on changes to the law or sort of different requirements within the legal team, it's a lot easier to capture those rather than seconding a lawyer for 6 months. Then you don't lose the relationships, but those relationships aren't as sticky with the legal teams. And then after 6 months, you go back with a product and the legal team says, actually, things have moved on, or we're not perhaps as interested in that as we were 6 months ago. So it's better to have that iterative approach. It really works if you're doing agile development.
Okay, cool. And then so last year that was your first product launch, wasn't it? That was because it was one of the really interesting things I think that we've seen from you is doing sort of almost like adopting not a vendor role, but you've been really embracing product development, and not only that, but you've been open sourcing it. So I think the first time that we talked about this was at ILTA last year when we actually got to go to ILTA in person, which was fun. And And you actually got a round of applause, I think, when you unveiled, it was Matt Mail, wasn't it? So tell us about, I mean, I think it'd be really interesting. One thing I wanted to do today, because we haven't talked about Matt Mail for a while. So obviously it created a lot of ripples, and I thought it'd be really interesting to, I mean, there might be people that are not familiar with Matt Mail, so perhaps you can help us talk about what it is, but then also just have a bit of a catch up before, and talk about what the updates have been. So tell us about Matt Mail, first of all, what it is.
Sure. So Matt Mail is an email filing system that we developed about 1.5 years ago, which essentially, if you've got 10 people who receive an email into their inbox and it's the exact same email, and one person on that email files it into the document management system, there's a unique identifier on every email. And what that person has essentially done is tagged that unique identifier with the client and matter number. What's happening for the other 9 people who have still got that email in their inbox is they are growing stressed and anxious that their inbox is a mess and that they need to file their emails. Maybe 2 or 3 do because they're also very organized, but you tend to find that there'll be a portion of lawyers who just can't get to email filing, the pilers as we call them, can't get to email filing, and they just leave it in their inbox. But they know that they want to do it. They want their mailbox to look matter-centric. They want it to look as organized as everybody else's, but they just haven't got time. We realized actually we have this fantastic structured data set in our document management system such that we could replicate that to those who haven't yet had time to organize those emails and present a nice web-based user interface to show them their inbox and sent items, but in a matter-centric context. And they can sort of go through and say, yep, I want that folder, I want that folder, I want those emails. They hit one button and we just essentially take all the emails from the inbox and sent items and we create the folders and we put the emails into those folders. So overnight, one lawyer, we had 60,000 emails that we were able to organize for them. Take them in the next day and they've got a nice matter-centric structure.
Wow.
So yeah, it was a really innovative tool, and actually it's been really interesting because that is a data set that the industry has been sitting on for the last 15 years. And I don't think anybody's quite made the connection that actually you could replicate that to Outlook to automate a task that is happening every day. If you had sort of 3 people who organized, one person did it first, 3 others did it, you might end up in a situation where 2 or 3 of the others might once a year go, I'm going to go and file my emails, spend a weekend doing it. So we're really just automating that task for those individuals.
And so, Curran.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's interesting because emails get a bit of a bad rep, I think, as sort of not very innovative as a solution or as a technology, and there's lots of other interesting legal tech out there. But right now, today, and probably for the foreseeable future, transactions are run through email, disputes are run through email. Every bit of legal work product that we do is run through email. That's just the way that law firms operate just now. So if you can sort of shave off a couple of seconds of efficiency on the platform that everybody uses, you'll have a much better impact in terms of efficiency to your lawyers than perhaps trying to get them to use some of the other systems. I think that's something that's quite key.
Yeah, no, I'm a former lawyer, as you know, and I live in Outlook. I mean, I think it'd be interesting to see with a lot of the way that people are moving post-COVID to collaboration platforms, and actually there does seem to be a little bit of progress in terms of using Teams and actually moving away from email. But I think I don't see things changing very quickly, and often it's actually the clients that are demanding email, isn't it? That's the interesting thing, that sometimes the lawyers are making attempts to use different collaboration platforms, and then the clients actually just say, can you just email that to me, which we see quite a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's a common standard, and it has been a common standard for the last 20 years, and it will continue to be a common standard. And it's a common standard which everybody gets their own environment, and then we can all decide to collaborate with others as we wish on our own terms by CCing them into emails. Whereas with some of the other collaboration platforms, you've got to take multiple different working practices and combine them both, and that's difficult to do sometimes just internally, never mind trying to do that with clients and then trying to do that with external advisors. So collaboration has got a long way to go before it properly works and it's properly seamless. So I do think email will be around for a little bit longer.
What's in terms of since you launched, so obviously it's been over a year now, so what's adoption? So let's talk about the open source side of it. So one of the things I think was quite sort of, so perhaps caused most shockwaves at the time that you, or perhaps it was just for anyone geeky, but was that was that you open sourced it. Why did you do that?
Yeah, I mean, I get the question quite a lot, and law firms all over the world invest in building their own technology. And sometimes that technology gets licensed to a vendor. Sometimes it gets sold directly. Sometimes law firms break off and do their own thing. But very often you've got some fantastically valuable products that don't really offer competitive advantage to that law firm, but that other law firms could benefit from. I've worked at many law firms, and I've seen fantastic products in each of those. And I just sort of thought, why do we just sit on this stuff? Why not extract some additional value in trying to open source it, share it with the market? That helps us to attract and retain tech talent. Open source is a very important aspect of retaining good tech talent. So that was one of the key reasons, but also just let's give it to other firms. We've already made the investment to build it. We're getting value from it. Some other firms will get value from it. They'll benefit from it. And the hope, albeit it's not happened yet, the hope was that other firms would follow suit and we would get to benefit from some of their open source technologies. I'm not sure if that's ever going to happen.
So that's not happening, because that was going to be my next question. So has there been much uptake in terms of, because obviously you've
yeah, so we've got firms on a weekly basis. I get asked for Mattmail. I don't know, I think Google is ranking that up at the top of the email management for law firms. So on a weekly basis, I get an email asking for Mattmail, and we've got 50 firms who are signed up for it so far, which is fantastic. They're all part of the community. But as to date, I haven't seen any other law firms follow our lead in terms of open sourcing their technology, such that we benefit from that.
Oh, that's interesting. But so in terms, it has. That's interesting that it's now 50 firms. So does that mean? So that's obviously they've got the code, which is on GitHub, isn't it? And they.
DevOps, yeah.
On what? Sorry.
It's like GitHub. This is your DevOps. It's
DevOps. Sorry, yeah, DevOps. And they does that mean that they're actually using it? Do you have any concept of what they're doing with it? Are they what's adoption like? Do you know?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and I think being really honest, and I think I've mentioned this again publicly, we know that every firm that's signed up to the Mattmail community hasn't been able to implement it. I think some tried to get it through budget approvals because it's not just as straightforward as right-click install. Some were trying to get teams of people who could help implement it, and I don't think that worked out. So we don't have any sort of numbers in terms of the amount of firms that were successfully able to implement it. I do stay in touch with about 5 to 10 firms, and I know that there's probably about, I'd say 5 who have been successful in implementing it. And we also, one person who asked for it was a consultant who helps law firms, I think, in Asia, and I think they've been quite successful at leveraging it. But
that's
yeah,
interesting. So 5 of them are using it. They're actually using it to file their mail.
I think about 5 people have been able to implement it successfully.
Okay, that's interesting. Do you think it's so? Is it because I guess a lot of law firms. I mean, it tends to go in phases, doesn't it? So whether it's to sort of buy or build, and actually we've seen law firms before develop capability to be able to build their own tech, and then there's sort of a phase where they kind of backlash against that and they just go out to market. Do you think that there's a lot of firms that just don't have the capability really to develop what you're trying to get them to develop, or encouraging them to develop?
I think if you think about buy or build, that's usually do I build something and invest a year's worth of development time to build an idea, or do I buy something off the shelf? With the open source stuff that we've done with Mattmail, we're essentially letting people get a build for free. We've already built.
I suppose that's true, isn't it? I suppose that's true. And
So one of the things that we do, like before we open source any project, we send it out to a security company to penetration test the code and make sure it's all good, and we're not going to get embarrassed when we open source it. And actually, that's a good marker for how long it takes to get the system up and running, because the vendor will get it, the security vendor will get it up and running, and we'll test it. Yeah. And we just did that last week for Etatona, the other platform. And I think within about a day, one engineer with quite a lot of experience was able to get the system up and running. So that's not a huge investment for the firm. I think some people are concerned about maintenance and support of the product, which is valid. But in terms of getting it live and getting it configured, most firms could probably go out and get 1 or 2 weeks worth of contractor resource for software engineers who know the Microsoft stack and could get that up and running. So I'm not sure where the barrier has been for implementing it. But I mean, maybe,
all right, cool. And then let's Etatona. So you've got contract late. So we, as you know, I've gone through different phases with this. Initially, I was like, couldn't get my head around it, And then I had another conversation with you, and I've written an article. And actually, when you probably said I don't understand it actually, but I feel like now I've kind of got to grips with it. So and actually, when you look at what's going on outside of the industry with data labeling, etc., it starts to put it in context and starts to make it all fall into place. But so for people that haven't read about what you're doing, just explain what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. So Etitona is a document labeling platform. The idea is that we load in contracts and agreements within the firm into a structured database that can present and represent a document as a sort of document object. And our lawyers can go through that document and select certain paragraphs, certain clauses, certain provisions, and label those to structure that data set and to build a database of labeled clauses. The main purpose for that is so that we can use that data to feed that into machine learning models, to train machine learning models to do review. So 4 months ago, we launched a force majeure app at the beginning of COVID for our clients. That was a completely homegrown solution. And we leveraged our Etitona platform to learn about force majeure. And then we could use that to train the sort of engine that did that detection. So that's why we built it. Internally, we had this huge task of getting clauses labeled, and we were doing it in Excel in the early days. And it's funny that the NHS had that issue with Excel a couple of weeks ago with 16,000 rows. Excel is not the best labeling platform. We thought actually we should have a proper system and database to do this. Much more efficient. So, but then we started to realize actually that a lot of the training and labeling that we had done with sort of vendor and partner solutions, where we weren't able to export any of that value, now we were able to retain that for ourselves because we had built it in our own system. And it might be that we use those data sets for our own purposes with our own open source machine learning models, but we do hope that we'll be able to partner with vendors in the future and give them a data set of, I don't know, labeled force majeure clauses, and maybe have an API, an application programming interface that we could integrate with to train their models so that we could use their system for a temporary purpose. But then that question of exporting out the model, exporting out the trained data goes away because we've already got that in our own environment.
Okay, so I've got loads of questions. So who first, before I've got questions about the vendor, the way it works, but so who does the labeling? It's the lawyers.
Interestingly for us, actually, we have a concept of an expert labeler and a non-expert. The expert labelers are lawyers. And we have been quite lucky actually through COVID with some slowdown in certain practice groups to get quite a lot of that labeling, which was really good. And we've also complemented that with non-expert labeling. And we have a document production team who, when they're not busy doing document production, this is a sort of task for them. It's quite a nice little thing to just do. It's like a base task across the firm. When you're not busy, jump into Etitona and do some labeling. The real value of being able to structure that data in its original form is that we're able to do something called deviation analysis. So if a non-expert labels a clause and none of the words relate to what all of the experts are doing, and they're a non-expert, we tend to ignore that because we think they've made a mistake. But we're able to do that comparison. And what we find is that the non-experts actually, if the documents are formatted properly and it's got a nice heading, they actually do quite a good job of labeling. And we're able to that in, and obviously that's a much lower cost to that as well for the firm.
Okay.
We could do a lot of that engineering on the data.
Okay, it's interesting. So after we first spoke, and I referred to this, so anyone listening, if you want to read about what Shawn is doing, we've written an article on legaltechnology.com. Just look up that and Etitona, and I put links to because obviously we know that the quality of AI or algorithms depends on the quality. It's all about the quality of the data. And I was interested to learn that there's outside of the industry, there's loads. It's a big business now, isn't it? Data labeling. So I was looking at. There's an article in Fortune that I referred to where there's companies like Labelbox, Scale AI, Hive, Cloud Factory, Samsource. I'm reading obviously, and then they observed that companies trying to deploy machine learning often slow down because they don't have systems in place to manage the data labeling. But for you, it's about, I think the way that you referred to it when we spoke for that article, is it's about retaining your secret sauce, about protecting your IP almost, isn't it? Rather than, is that right?
Yeah, I think we know that the amount of effort that goes into labeling agreements, and we know that there's quite a lot of value in the underlying documents, and we certainly as an organisation want to make sure that we can retain that certainly export it if we were able to partner with a firm or a vendor to export it. At this point in time, there is no way for investment into a vendor product that we know, it might exist, but that we know, investment into a vendor product, there's no way to export that. There has been some conversations about models being able to be shared between vendors or being able to be shared between tenants within a vendor, but we know there's no way to export that. And that's something that's not an issue that's come up for us. I've actually learned from that by speaking to certain clients and people who sort of have that concern that if you are making that investment in time and effort and getting people to label, that obviously as an organisation you want to try and retain that investment. So it's just a knowledge management.
And then within what you're doing, so you've got a toner, so you've done the labelling, but it's not so it's kind of almost like done in isolation, or it's not necessarily for a specific project. You've got effectively, if my understanding is correct, you've got this bank which will then be potentially shifted in order to when you have a specific project in mind. Is that right?
Yeah. So the idea is that, well, the big idea if Etitona catches on, and if every company and if, in-house and law firms, if we all start to use it, is that independent organisation would do their labelling, build their assets, build that structured labelling content, and then we would maybe an in-house team and a law firm, or an in-house team and 3 law firms would come together for a specific use case, let's say change of control and a services agreement, and they might join the data together. They would all independently train a model in an intermediary system, a vendor. That model would get built, and then they could use that system for the purposes of review, and then that model could be deleted, any derivative forms of that data could be deleted, and everybody would retreat back into their own private database, and they would continue to evolve it and improve it.
Does it work? Is it compatible? So will it Etitona actually interact? Is it compatible with vendors' systems?
I'm not sure how that will evolve. If you look at Silicon Valley and these labeling platforms, the review platforms that perhaps are for self-driving cars, etc., they will probably have APIs that data can be fed into. So a fantastic outcome for this for us would be all of the vendors create an open API that is a standard, market standard, that accepts trained labeled data over the internet, whatever, and being able to just connect to that, train a model from our source system to their system, use their system for a purpose, and then we have control in a private tenant to be able to delete that, but we get the benefit of their fantastic review technology, their OCRing, their export from Excel, the way that they structure the review, marking things as relevant, all that. We don't have that system, and we want to benefit from that, but we would hope that the vendors evolve some form of API system such that our data can be used to train their models. If that doesn't happen over the next 5 years, and it might not, then what I think you will expect to see in the industry is that more law firms and their clients will get more savvy to the value of their data and their experience, and will end up with companies building their own review systems. But I don't think we need to get there. I do think that the vendors have got a fantastic opportunity here to really integrate with some of these systems.
And part of the reason for doing this was not so part of it is because so that you don't have to repeat the exercise with all of the different vendors. So because you're effectively reinventing the wheel. But it's part of it because do you think that they do? I guess vendors would probably argue that they don't that they can agree not to kind of take you benefit. I don't know how to express it. Benefit from your data, and they probably would argue that they don't capitalize on your data, and they give it. Do you think that's fair? Or?
Absolutely. They've got lots of vendors who will have a company model and a customer model, and there will be no line between the customer model and the company model. And that's absolutely fair. But then there's a question, and the question still exists of how do I export out my customer model such that I can use it in a different product to reduce the stickiness that I have to one vendor? That still exists. So even if they're not benefiting from it, and I'm sure many don't, I'm not suggesting that they are, but we still have the point of that labeled data has significant value. Therefore, we may as well just do it in our own system and then share it with them for a temporary purpose. And then there's no question about if they delete it, right? If you do a training in that system, and then the only option is for that model to be deleted, and their company model doesn't benefit from it, we still lose out because we've spent a lot of time.
Yeah, I get that. And then with the, I was really interested to taking you back to the point about working with other law firms. So, and obviously so that's a really interesting thing. So how do you envisage that happening? Do you, A, I suppose, have you had any feedback already? Is it really early days?
No.
B, I guess, how does it work, and how do you protect client confidentiality? Because I guess within all of the data, that if you're pooling it, how does it work so that you're not breaching any data privacy rules?
Absolutely. So that's a great point. So data privacy, if we had hosted this solution on Amazon or Azure and told all these law firms to upload the data into our system to do the training, there would have been loads of data privacy, and we would be challenged with the fact that we are trying to benefit from that model and create a company model. And that's why for us, the only way that this would have worked is for us to just open source the raw code, open source the raw system. We don't give Etitona with any pre-populated labels. We don't give Etitona with any data. We just give a system that allows people to structure their content. So for me, the only option was to open source it, to encourage that collaboration across many different firms. And in terms of the take up, we launched it last week, and we have now, I've not been able to get approval yet from some of them, so I can't mention them, but we've got 4 law firms as far as Los Angeles to Japan who have signed up so far. We've actually got a big technology vendor who've signed up, and we've got an in-house team as well. So which is quite interesting, because with Mapmail we didn't actually get any tech vendors or anybody in-house. So it does show that this is struck a chord with a sort of different type of part of the industry.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Okay, and then so what's on? So and so the in terms of so what now? So you're going to just see, I guess, your sort of hope that it's interesting. I kind of thought that there was more of a pooling sort of concept, that you wanted to effectively pool data in order to, obviously, there's this perception, obviously the more data you have, the better. But one of the questions I think I had was, do you think collaboration yields better models? Do you think that's the case?
Absolutely. I think it was one of the points you mentioned before.
Yeah.
If we are Travis Smith and we've got an agreed form document, and there's another firm on the other side, and we've both got that agreed form, right now, perhaps we're both labelling that agreement.
Yeah.
We're both labelling the exact same force majeure provision, the exact same change of control provision, and that is just a waste of effort. And actually, if there was a way for, it's probably going to have to be the clients who really take us up on this, but if there was a way for labelling to almost be evenly distributed around the market, certainly if you're a big corporate and you've got 30 panel law firms, you're probably looking at how you distribute labelling in a really efficient way to make sure there is no duplication. I can see that evolving. I think the technology will get there, and we'll get to a point. We've actually just, after open sourcing it, we've come up with a feature where if we get a clause that has been labelled 5 times and it's the exact same language, which we're finding quite a lot now, we're at the point of thinking, well, what's the point in continuing to present that clause to anybody else going forward? Because it's already been labelled 5 times. So the way that we've organised the database and the way that Etitona structures the document, we can just pull that paragraph, we can pull that clause out of the document, such that somebody else going into another document with that exact same clause, they wouldn't see that clause. So it's just a really efficient way through the document to label it to the point at which you've got all of the labeling done, and then the data is structured, and then it's about improving the AI for review purposes.
I can't wait to hear the next installment. So what's on the roadmap? What can we expect? We've only got about a minute, 2 minutes left. But what's your sort of roadmap looking like from now?
Yes, I mean, we're doing a lot of work, like there is innovation, there's R&D, there's engineering, but we are doing a lot of fantastic work just with off-the-shelf technology, partnering with a number of vendors, things like DocuSign and Box. We've rolled out Box recently, that's been really successful. We're doing a little bit of work around email management as well. So we're continuing to develop solutions and to leverage off-the-shelf technology where it makes sense. I think we will continue to open source. We've got a product now which is live across the whole business, which is less on the transformational side and more on the sort of run operational side, which has been really successful, and we might end up doing something with that in the open source space early next year. So we'll continue to do it. I think everybody thought this was just a PR stunt from us a year ago, but it was part of a long-term strategy, and we hope that many other law firms will follow our suit, and we can continue to share this technology where it doesn't provide competitive advantage.
Okay, well, look, I wouldn't leave it there, but Shawn, thank you. It's always so interesting to chat to you, and thank you so much for joining me.
No worries. Thanks, Caroline.
Cheers, thanks. Bye.
Bye.